Welcome back. So, Sean, just before we went to break, I was going to ask you to tell us what the perception was in Iran of Russia and specifically Vladimir Putin and the administration that's there now with Medvedev and Putin.
Right, right. I think they look at the Russians with suspicion. Again, it's an historical rivalry because the Russians did work with the British to carve up Iran historically. And they think of they think of Russia as almost a necessary ally at the moment. They think the Russians are using them in a game with the West. They recognize that right now it's a Russian-British imperial game that's being played, and the Russians don't maybe love the Iranians, but they will use them to make sure that they keep the British from destabilizing this region or basically continuing their warfare clandestinely and between various clandestine and surreptitious ops against the Russian government.
See, here's why I asked that question. I understand from various people I've talked to that the Russians had at one point offered to develop a certain amount of the nuclear technology of Iran, that the idea of peaceful use of nuclear power is something that the Russians are prepared to defend in the area, but there have been some friction around that. So partially I was asking you about, concerning that. I mean, you of course keep talking about the issue of the nuclear weapon, the right for the weapons, and you relate that to this issue of preventive warfare.
Yeah.
But I would like to ask you, because I think you haven't had a chance to clarify it before, your position in terms of nuclear power in Iran, and nuclear power and its relationship to the military.
Right, right. Well, in one sense, of course, I would love for the Russians and Iranians to cooperate just in terms of their industry and their economies to, find ways of having the Russians involved in the Iranian enrichment program and nuclear program overall. I understand, again, as I said, because of the historical phobia of Russian involvement in Iranian sovereign affairs. You see unfortunately, Iran became hyper-nationalistic and to the point of paranoia after the Shah was deposed, because they realized the amount of influence that the Americans and British and Israelis had in keeping the Shah in power, of actually running his savak, which was a very, they used torture. They were a very notoriously corrupt and brutal regime that was involved in basically CIA kind of activities, right, as a police state. So they look obviously askance at any kind of foreign interference ever since the Shah was overthrown 33 years ago. And that's probably the reason they did not want the Russians in the country to oversee their plants. And that's probably the reason they haven't been more cooperative with the IAEA, insofar as they're very paranoid people about being spied upon, and they want to be respected as a nation state in a world where they feel that they have the same right as a nation that we in America feel we have. I mean, if we don't allow IAEA inspectors to come and interrogate us, and we're not partaking in the World Court, for example. I mean, we feel that we have a sovereignty within our borders. So we wouldn't have Russians coming in and operating our nuclear facilities, for example, right? And they feel that they have the same right that we do. And that's, I think, something that's worth discussing, is a question of, look, if we're dealing with sovereign nation states, why don't they have that right? Why do we assume that they're, what is this essential, it harks back to colonialism and, white man's burden in a sense, but why do we feel that, because you're brown skin or, or Persian, that you don't have the same capabilities to operate nuclear power plants that a white person does? You see?
Yeah, that certainly would be one of the things that would be in people's mind. Coming back to this question of British intelligence for a minute, Southwest Asia, meaning Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, Syria, the entire gamut of countries there, is a target area of British intelligence from the time of the Great Game, and even perhaps a little earlier. Bernard Lewis.
The Crimean War, remember? The Crimean War between the Turks and the Russians. That was decisive. I think that was 1840s, 50s.
Early 50s.
And that was essential towards, again, that's British strategy has always been balance of power politics. Basically you may ally with the more powerful, but you also secretly ally with the second and third most powerful, and always try to cripple that which is your greatest rival. And I think that the British always saw the Russians as the most powerful rival on the continent of Europe, until the Germans came up in the late part of the 19th century after Bismarck's reforms.
Now, the thing you see, in my view, if you look at, for example, the Bernard Lewis issue, Bernard Lewis being the British intelligence agent that was responsible for the 1970s arc of crisis policy, you look at what President Obama is doing and has been doing in this area, it is virtually indistinguishable from the Bush neocon policy of the 2000s, and actually the Bush neocon policy, for that matter, even though the first Bush 41 administration.
Right.
Now, what's your view of how the Obama administration? What's their role? Because you also have a lot of peculiar things that have happened in the United States, like the National Defense Authorization Act and so on. So
yeah, I mean, I've tried to emphasize on one talk show, Your Voice Counts, it's called, from some of the USS Liberty survivors, some veterans, to emphasize to them that what's going on is that we're facing a financial meltdown in Western Europe and America. It's ongoing. You know, the point is that they keep maybe lifting the stock market temporarily and, you know, telling you that the recession will, you know, the depression will not be so bad. We're going to enter a recession phase and then it'll be over. But the truth is, from people who understand it, it's not getting better. We haven't solved the derivatives problem. The banks were bailed out. They did not issue credit to the common people. The working man is going to be in revolt. Occupy Wall Street was one expression of this. It will continue, and it could get worse. So from my sources, I've always said that this coming period, around by February, March, it's a very dangerous time that we could be facing something akin to martial law scenario, because we have now the conditions for martial law based on the National Defense Authorization Act of 2012, which Obama actually not only signed, he pushed for the fact that we can now detain U.S. citizens by the military indefinitely without civilian trial, which is a complete abrogation of the Constitution, the whole concept of due process and habeas corpus. This is gone now, as of March. So we're getting into this phase now, the so-called blackout from, you know, these people call blackout, because what you can find, what they might do, for example, they might have intermittent power outages in neighborhoods, like happened in my friend's neighborhood the other night, where the power went out and at 2 or 3 in the morning, and cops started coming, knocking on people's doors, randomly searching houses, and they ended up taking 2 or 3 people away in the night. No explanation, right? Now this happened in Jersey. Well, that seems like a test scenario for something that could happen in New York City or any neighborhood across America. And because you have the condition of being told that Iran is a terrorist threat and Iran is ready to use terrorism against America, you will assume that this must have something to do with Iranian terrorists ready to attack America. So they have basically created all the conditions for battlefield America. The NDAA stipulated it. Obama introduced clones to be utilized in capturing criminals or whatnot, and being used for police purposes here in America. Obama has now assassinated American citizens last year. So he's put everything in place now for what could be martial law, and all you need is the threat from some amorphous enemy, and if it comes from Iran, don't be surprised.
You know,
or if they say it comes from Iran, don't be surprised. That's what they will name as their target. But if it's really coming from Iran, I would be surprised. And actually, I would say one other thing: the way that they can run tests like this, you know, almost an anticipation of a false flag operation, is the Thai scenario, where a week ago an Iranian man in Thailand was arrested with C4 and, you know, blew himself up, right? And they said, oh, he was about to start terrorism. He was basically going to start terrorizing people in the city he was in. I'm not sure if it was Bangkok or which city. I think it was on the coast. But the point is that he's allegedly working for the Iranian government. Well, that sounds to me like you're setting up a false flag scenario for America, and you're just running operations. You're running a test for it abroad, and you're getting people to start thinking in that way, that, okay, Iranians are going to start using terrorism, and next thing you know, it'll come here. But really, you don't know where it's coming from. You don't know if it's American or American, Israeli, British intelligence. I mean, we know, for example, that many of these terrorist groups, cells, networks are operated out of London. I mean, many journalists, conservative journalists, have called it Londonistan. And they assume it's because the British are so liberal in their mentality, but actually it's because the British run this as an imperial tactic, a way of deploying cells around the world.
I mean, that terrorism is not independent.
Exactly. I mean, even bin Laden had an estate in Wembley in London until 2000 at least. I mean, he may not have been living there actively, but the point is that he had a place there. And this is many years after Interpol says that he's a wanted man. So you're dealing with a world where like 1984, the terrorists are usually homegrown. I mean, Orwell would have known. He was an intelligence operative. He would have known the fact that what you want to do. It's like with the what they were doing with the IRA in Ireland. I mean, you plant your own people. You have people at least that are working for you that you understand their worldview. You understand what they're capable of doing, and then you deploy them. And if they blow something up, if you want a police state, well, that works hand in hand.
Right, exactly.
Well, Sean, you're obviously so knowledgeable in politics and what's going on in the Middle East. How can Americans learn what you know? What are your sources? And how can we, if we're supposed to trust the news organizations and what they bring to us, and if that's not really the whole story, what are your sources? How can we become more knowledgeable?
Right. Well, I mean, I try to study everything. Obviously, I have good contacts, like Dennis Speed here and his organization. But I studied history for 4 years between Princeton and Oxford. So it's, you have to have a certain background in understanding how history works. You have to recognize the fact that the government the government of America has been working as an extension of British imperial politics essentially since the death of Kennedy. And I mean, it really began with the Cold War, with FDR's death, but certainly by the time of Kennedy's assassination. We have not really been an independent republic as we claim to be. And it's just evidenced by the fact that the dialogue itself has shifted. I mean, the fact is that when we are saying as Americans, part of a republic, based on Washington's principle of no entangling alliances, that we have some special relationship with Israel and England, you have to question that. Because why should we have a special relationship with those two countries? What is ordained about it? We're dealing with over 170 nations around the world. What happened to this concept of having bilateral treaties, of sending out, basically the American way of sending out American engineers and citizens to basically help, those countries construct things independently to build their economies? The fact that all the concepts that we're dealing with for the most part, from free market economics to, the neoliberal Kant now, to the globalization, which is really just the imperial game of telling other nations what to do within their sovereign states. All this is predicated on British imperial politics. So, I mean, you can read my thesis, which, I'd be happy to publish somewhere at some point to at least get a sense of how the British imperialism shifted to the New World Order word, which Obama, by the way, loves to use, that we're in a New World Order. Well, we're not a New World Order. This is an American republic. It was founded on a constitution. You cannot violate the Constitution just because you assume that there are now people around the world that can kill you. You know what? When anarchists were deployed into Russia, let's say by the British, or from Russia into America in the past, that was just as much an issue of globalization as the world we're living in now, and that took place over 100 years ago. So it's a fantasy to say that now all of a sudden we're in a globalized world where people can kill you from 10,000 miles away. No, historically we always had these kind of situations and relationships. But are we going to fall back on our principle of a republic that actually respects borders, that actually wants to help develop the world with industry, with bilateral treaties of trade, and not basically enforcing the IMF's policy, or the World Bank austerity, for example, IMF austerity policies, or World Bank loans with conditions? I mean, is that the world we're going towards, or do we want a sane New Deal style of development?
When we come back, we're going to take a break now. I want to just say that what we'll do, we have a lot of questions about the conversion and about what happened, and Miriam will take that up as our lead-in. So we're going to take another break now, everybody, and I hope that what's happening is that you're getting as much of an education as we are. So we'll be right back after these messages. Don't go away.